Good afternoon, everyone. I am super excited to be back with all of you today. So we're going to continue going through our journey on facilities management, utilities management, and I really do encourage you to go back and have a look at the previous videos on the facilities management, utilities management. We're going through a nice journey of looking at everything holistically, and I've sort of unpacked a couple of departments over the last couple of weeks. So just a reminder that every 2 weeks at 2 o'clock, I'll jump on here and share a little bit of advice around the utilities management, just to help coach you through these things that a lot of people take for granted, or you just might not be aware of these sort of solutions, etc. Today, I'm excited because one of the things that's very close to me or to my heart is the idea of looking after your utilities. And obviously, from my perspective, I head up the SAPIN-Prepaid, and utilities is a huge portion of that, and a huge portion of the reason that I've got into this idea of looking after the prepaid and introducing prepaid to the members of the South African Property Investors Network. And the reason for that is because I had to really discover all of this myself the hard way on all of my own properties, all of the properties I was involved in. And there's a lot of information out there that really does get very confusing. So the idea here is, let's try and get rid of that confusion. Let's make sure that everyone who is involved in SAPIN has the best information at hand. So they're able to look at how and manage their utilities a lot more smoothly and not make the mistakes. I think that's a big one. It's good enough to learn from your mistakes, but it's way better to learn from other people's mistakes and not implement them yourself. So through this journey that we're going through on the utilities management, the facilities management, it's just about sharing knowledge from the collective. And I think that's one of the great strong points of being part of a network, part of a community of like-minded people. Okay, so looking at utilities, I think it's very important to really make sure you're wearing the right hat. So on the one side, as a property owner, a lot of us are quite comfortable when you own a property and you live in it, so it's your residential property that you own. And that's easier to manage because you're in the property, you're aware of what's happening, you can deal with all the gremlins that come up and the little issues, etc. Versus the idea of being a property investor or a landlord. And now this is where things get a lot more difficult because you're not present on the property. You're not listening to and seeing all the problems that are coming as they come. You're not able to prevent them or preempt them. So in my opinion, it's a lot more important to pay attention or to set up systems to make sure that you are able to see the triggers and the red flags that are going to let you know that there's a problem. So for me, what you do at home should be a norm and it becomes easy, but you should be thinking when you're at home in your residential property, or even if you're renting a property that you live in and you own property that you are a landlord for and you're renting out. So think of what's happening in the property that you live in and think of ways that are going to make sure that you can optimize properties that you're renting out. And I think that's important because when you're living in the property, you're able to see and sort of tweak things to make them and improve them. And then you start thinking, okay, can I implement this on one of my properties for my tenants to make sure that I'm not having to deal with excessive maintenance issues, I'm reducing the administration that comes with it, etc. So for me, the administration is a big one. And the reason for that is because the most valuable thing that you have is your time. And if you spend all of your time worrying about the administration, running after your tenants, fixing things, sorting things out, sending people out to do repairs, going to the property to read your meters, etc., then you're wasting that valuable commodity being your time. So I really encourage people to look at what happens in their own space and see how you can improve what you're doing on your properties themselves. Okay, so going through it, if there's a couple types of properties that we tend to have. So, and the main thing is to look at it as in a body corporate, there's one type of administration that goes with that. And in a single dwelling unit or a residential property, single house, etc., where you're not beholden to your body corporate, etc. You're the owner of the property. The only authority over and above that is maybe your neighborhood watches. Maybe if you're in a little bit more of a special rates area, there's some things that happen around that. But generally, when you're in a single family dwelling, you are dealing directly with the municipality, you're dealing directly with Eskom. Versus when you're in a body corporate, you're then more restricted because now you're dealing with your body corporate setup. And then sometimes there's also the addition of Eskom or the municipality outside of the body corporate. So you've got to bear that in mind. What is nice about body corporates is a lot of the admin is done through the body corporate management. So the meters are read by the caretakers on the property or the staff of the management company. So that sort of relieves a little bit of the admin on your side. The other side of it is the fact that there are a couple of headaches that come with it, where you have to sort of request permission before you sort of improve things, etc. And it's just good to bear that in mind. You can't just do your own thing. You need to go report things. You need to sort of ask permission, etc. before you do certain changes, because that can impact you later on. It can also impact the body corporate's insurance policies, etc. So it's just important to remember that you're part of this community, you're part of a body corporate community, and you're responsible to interact with their rules and regulations in that space. Okay, but then, so maybe just keep it simple. I'll look at the idea of being on a single residential property, or even in that space, if it's a house that's been converted into a multi-let house of multiple occupancy, etc. That environment, now you become the body corporate management when you're doing a multi-let, etc. So in the same way, you need to set up these different rules, different departments that you're managing your utilities through. Okay, so on a normal property, the utilities that you're looking at is generally what's on your municipality statement, or generally what's on your body corporate levy statement. Okay, and those are things like your water, your electricity, your sewage, your refuse. So those are the four things that we're very aware of and we pay attention to, because they the run of the mill. It happens every single day, etc., or every single month, and you can see they're tangible. Okay, and especially seeing them on the statements. And then I think in this day and age, we have to also start thinking about including our Wi-Fi, our internet as another utility, because I think as we go into the future, that's going to be something that's almost as important as water. So like from a perspective of basic human rights element. Okay, so from that perspective, I do think that as soon as possible, when it comes to your properties, you want to look at, how do I make sure that I'm getting high-speed internet to this property, so as my tenants are able to get high-speed internet. And then there's also that ability to set your properties above the competition. Am I able to provide free internet to my tenants on these properties, etc.? So because that really does give value to your tenants, and the idea is to keep your tenants for as long as possible. So again, looking through those, it's water, electricity, sewage, your refuse, and then obviously internet. Those are the things that you start thinking about when it comes to utilities management. Then starting off on the water side. So your water it's important to bear in mind that some municipalities, some areas, etc., will include water include sewage in the pricing of water, but there's some areas that they don't include sewage in that pricing per kiloliter. And then you've got to be paying attention to that. So what's important around that is, if generally the charging for sewage is, if you use 100 liters or 100 kiloliters of water, you're then billed for the removal of 100 kiloliters of sewage. So it's kind of, the water comes in, the water goes out as sewage, and they bill you for what goes in, they bill you for what goes out of the property. And that's in a situation if your property is on a waterborne sewage system. Okay, there are a lot of areas out there where they don't have a waterborne sewage. And what that means is, basically, when you flush the toilet or you pull the plug out of the bath, the water flows through the pipes into a main sewage pipe on the street, or inside the street, so not onto the street, flows into those main sewage pipes. It goes through to a pump house, and it goes directly to the sewage processing plants. There's nothing that you need to worry about in that space, but you have to pay for that sewage to basically leave your property. So that's why I say it's important to be aware: is there water coming in? Are you being billed for sewage going out? And I'll come to that when we maybe talk about the prepaid water later. So on that, the other side to sewage is often some properties won't have waterborne sewage, so they would then have a septic tank system. Okay, and that basically means that instead of the sewage going into the municipality main sewage lines, it goes into a septic tank on your property, and then that allows all the solids to settle out of it, and the liquids will then be dispersed into the property itself. So there's a lot of sort of legislation around septic tanks, etc. But the important thing is to be aware when you buy a property: am I dealing with a septic tank, or am I dealing with waterborne sewage? And you can factor that in. From a septic tank, every couple of years, that septic tank will then fill up, and you then need to pay for a truck to come through and pump and empty out that septic tank. They then pump it into a big tanker, and they take that away, and they actually then take that directly to the sewage processing plants. Okay, but you've just got to bear in mind that every couple of years you're going to have to pay for that to be transported away. At the same time, you're not paying the same rate that you would be paying for the waterborne sewage. So there's benefit in it from that perspective. Okay, what's another nice tip around the idea of if you're on waterborne sewage, you're paying for the sewage based on the calculations from your water meter. So if you use 100 kiloliters, then you're paying for 100 kiloliters of sewage. If you are watering your garden with the municipal water, then you're paying for the sewage complement of that as well. So if you watering your garden 100 kiloliters a month, you're paying 100 kiloliters a month for the sewage element of that to go away. So that's where it's nice to look at it from a perspective of JoJo tanks, where you're collecting rainwater and you're looking after your landscaping. So rather install a JoJo tank, rather collect the rainwater and use that rainwater to water your garden, because that way you're not paying for the sewage that's linked to, or paying for the sewage costs that's linked to your water consumption. So I think that's a very important one. I think people forget that those go together. So wherever you can, rather use rainwater to water the gardens. And I think that's important also from a perspective of the septic tank, etc. So you want to reduce your consumption as much as possible. Okay, then moving on to electricity. I think that is a lot easier for people to understand, but it's important to really understand that if you have a single dwelling, you're paying for one electrical supply, which means you've got one electrical meter that the municipality is reading, and the municipality is billing you based on that. However, if you're in a sectional title building, so for instance, if you own a building with multiple units in it, then you need to look at the fact that is it a building that is registered as a sectional title and therefore has individual meters per unit. Then that means you've got to have those meters read. There's got to be a municipality account for each one of those units, and it means that you need to pay each one of those units. That obviously gets quite admin intensive when you've got 20, 30, 100 units in a building, etc., that you're managing. So the difference there, where it's a sectionalized building compared to a building that isn't sectionalized, but it's got multiple units. So then that's more like a share block setup. In those situations, you would have one single meter that comes to the property, and then the body corporate in that building, or you as the owner, if you own the whole building, would then be responsible for each of the sub-meters, and you manage that, but you're paying for the bulk meter that supplies the whole property. And that would be the same with the water. You pay for a bulk meter, and then you have to individually meter your units, and that's your responsibility beyond the municipality bulk meter. In a sectional building, the municipality recognizes each one of the units, and they would then supply a meter per unit from a municipality perspective. So that's quite a big one to pay attention to. If it's confusing, you're welcome to reach out to me on the SAPIN Connect prepaid page, that email goes straight to me, and I'm very happy to answer any questions or help you if you're a little bit confused. I think there's no stupid questions when it comes to a lot of this stuff. It's really, we're here to help everyone so you don't make mistakes. Okay, so that's covering the electricity. The electricity basically is the only major difference in electricity is you can often have single phase on most residential properties, and then on any bigger properties, commercial properties, etc., you would then have what they call three phase. So you're looking at single phase, three phase, and the major difference there is to understand that if it's a single dwelling unit, there's not too much consumption on the property, and therefore single phase is generally acceptable. Okay, if you've got a building or a property that's got multiple units on it, then that's where you start needing to go into three phase. And the idea is then there's a lot more power availability for the property, and you're able to balance and split the load across the property to the different phases, etc. Okay, that also becomes important if you're looking at a multi-let property. If it's on a single phase, you're generally limited to no more than 2 geysers on the property because of the amount of power that goes to a geyser. So generally, if you're going to have a multi-let property with more than 2 geysers, then you start needing to look at putting in 3-phase power on that property, because then that power consumption is split over the 3 phases, and those geysers are able to then be powered, and you've got less sort of issues of burning out cables. You've got less issues of circuit breakers dropping all the time because there's overdrawing on the property, etc. So it's just a small thing to bear in mind. And then obviously in commercial settings, generally if it's a small little retail space, like what you would normally have on the ground floor of a building, that would just be straightforward, and single phase is acceptable. So if it was just a hairdresser or something minor like that. But when you start getting into bigger catering companies, so bigger restaurants, when they've got lots of extractor fans, lots of chip fryers, all of these high power consuming appliances, then you start needing 3-phase. And then likewise, if you've got bigger retail stores with lots of fridges, etc., then you also want the protection of 3-phase, where if 1 phase goes down, there's still fridges that work, etc., on another phase. And often that's out of your control. So 1 phase will go down on the street side, on the municipality side, or on Eskom side. So those are the major things around the electricity side. And then obviously I touched on the refuse, or should I say, I touched on the internet. I think that is something that as we move into the future, it's going to be so essential that you give that value to your tenants, and you make sure that you do have internet available, whether you provide the internet and charge your tenants for it, or whether you provide the internet and it's just a great value add, it's for free. So for you, it's a low cost, and for them, it's a low value, or should I say a high value experience that they're receiving, which will improve their experience living in your property. Or if you supply the fiber to the property, and the tenant is then responsible for connecting to their own ISP provider, and they're able to then pay their own bill, etc. So there's ways around that. I do like the idea of you being in control of that service, so that you're the one who is paying for the internet, because that means that you're not going through a change of different service providers on the property. It gives you an awareness of who is looking after the connection to your property. So from my perspective, I like that little bit of control. It's also a nice tool where it currently isn't a basic right for people to have for them to have internet, but you can't take away your electricity, you can't take away the water. If you're providing free internet, then it's quite nice to know that, hey, you're getting free internet, and when your tenant doesn't pay their bills on time, you're in the power or position to disconnect their internet. And believe me, tenants jump at you quickly to say, hey, my internet's not working, I can't get onto Facebook, I can't get onto YouTube, etc. And they start going, hey, why is it disconnected? And then you just go, hey, you haven't paid your bill, so I haven't been able to pay for the internet, so therefore it's not working. And you see that sort of change in their perspective, and then they suddenly catch up and pay. So it just gives you one extra tool that I quite like. But then obviously if it does break down, then you're the one that the tenant is nagging. So you got to weigh up the pros and cons around that. And then touching on refuse. So refuse is also an important one. And again, like that would happen in the body corporate space or in your single dwelling unit. So where you have to get rid of the refuse on the property. So it's important to know what the procedure is from the municipality's perspective, whether you need to be providing wheelie bins, whether your tenants need to be providing black bags, and it's important to monitor that. So how do you get the refuse from your tenant to the landfill? Is it something that you need to pay attention to, that you need to have a caretaker on bigger properties who is making sure that the refuse is put out for the municipality to collect? Or is there some way that you're inspecting to make sure that there's no refuse piling up on the property, turning your own property into a dump? So you need to really pay attention to the refuse. There's some municipalities, so an example would be the city of Cape Town. You have to pay for each wheelie bin, and that basically gives you the maximum volume that you're allowed to have collected from your property by the municipality. So what that means is if you've got a wheelie bin and you've got an extra bag that doesn't fit into the wheelie bin, then they won't take that extra bag. It will often be left behind on the street, okay, because it means that you're using more refuse than what you've been allocated to. And in that situation, you then need to go and apply for an additional right to have an additional wheelie bin, and then you're obviously able to fill those bins in that way. So it's just good to be mindful of that sort of thing. As you have more occupants in the property, that expense can go up as well. Okay, and then maybe touching on the idea of these utilities, it's super important for you as a landlord to include the fact that you will be recovering these costs from your tenant in the lease agreement. Okay, you need to include that in your lease agreement. So if you are having a estate agent or letting agent procure a tenant for you, make sure that it's in the lease agreement that you are able to recover the costs for utilities from the tenant. Okay, and I think that's also important. If you are giving rent where it's including water or including lights, etc., it's just good to be mindful that at some point you are going to want to charge them. So either that tenant has the option to move on, or you're able to then refer back to the lease agreement and say, listen, I gave you that benefit before. Unfortunately, now I have to start charging you for these utilities. Okay. As an investor, you shouldn't be giving free utilities away unless it's giving you a value that sort of outweighs the expense. So as an example, where I talk about giving them free Wi-Fi, there's a value because it makes the tenants enjoy the property more, and it makes them less likely to want to leave your property, and you then having to go through the expense of finding a new tenant. So for me, you should be charging for lights, you should be charging for water, and I think that's very important, because if something's for free, people abuse it. Okay. And I think for me, when you move into that space, the worst thing you can do for yourself as a investor or landlord in the space where we're looking at wanting to build our portfolios, we don't want to just have one little unit ticking away in the background. We want to have a portfolio that's able to replace our income source. So if it's part of your generational wealth journey, if it's part of your retirement plan, etc., you want to basically scale and build your portfolio. So you need to implement solutions that makes it user friendly or reduces your admin as you get bigger. Okay. And one of the most powerful ways for me for you to do that is to look into doing prepaid meters. Okay. And it's so important, because you can be aware that there is prepaid electricity, there is prepaid water, and there is the ability to install prepaid gas. So as we have this impact of load shedding, it's good to be aware that if you've got a multi-let property, you can potentially bulk supply gas to your tenants and then charge them through a prepaid meter into each of their units. So the prepaid gas is an option there. But as a bare minimum, you should be doing prepaid electricity, and as soon as possible, you should be planning to go on to prepaid water. And prepaid water for me is a powerful one, because it obviously helps on the fact that tenants are paying in advance of what they're using. And with that, the huge benefit for me is the fact that it trains them to be conscious of their consumption. Okay. And what that means is they are not then leaving toilets running. They are not letting taps drip, etc. They are now aware that they are paying upfront for that utility. So then they make sure that they fixing leaking taps, they're fixing leaking toilets, etc. Because remember, in your lease agreement, your tenant is responsible for maintenance of those sort of things. So if the rubber in the tap needs to be, the rubber washer in the tap needs to be replaced, your tenant is responsible to do that. And that can happen once a year, once every 2 years, etc. Okay, but that becomes their responsibility. And you must bear in mind that if a tenant isn't paying for the water and isn't aware of the direct cost of water, then they're not going to bother to repair that because it's inconvenient. If they don't have the skill set to do it themselves, it's inconvenient for them to send or call a plumber in and pay for a plumber. Okay. And I think it's important to remember that if you send a invoice for the consumption that your tenant has used over the previous month, and you send them an invoice, often if that is more than they expected or they don't have the budget for it, then you're going to end up waiting for the money. And I've also seen instances where they go like, oh, that I'm not paying that expensive water bill. It's your toilet that's leaking. You need to come fix the toilet. Instead of the converse happening where, hey, Mr. Landlord, my toilet's leaking. Please, can you send a plumber to fix it? So because I'm paying for the water, I don't want it to be wasted. Is that kind of shift in people's perspective. So water meters are super important when it comes to managing properties or managing your portfolio. Another benefit to water meters that I always tout is if your geyser bursts on the property, then if there's no one at home during the day when it bursts, because it normally does that, it bursts on the weekend or it bursts at midnight when no one's awake and aware, or it bursts in the morning and the water just runs the whole day until someone gets home. And unfortunately, if the geyser is burst, the water's just running in and out, and it's flooding your house. It's wasting all that water, so you're going to have to pay for that water that's been wasted, and it will just flow until someone realizes it's leaking. Same thing with a leaking pipe underground. The water will flow and flow and flow until it maybe washes away sand, but very often you're not aware that there's a leaking pipe underground. So the only time you find out is when you get a massive municipality bill at the end of the month. And often you're now half a month after the fact time that you receive your municipality bill. So it's important for me to rather install a prepaid meter in that situation where you know that your budget is 500 Rand a week. And if you put 500 Rand in on Monday and on Tuesday the water runs out, then there's already a red flag and you're going to go and look for what the problem is. And likewise, if the water runs out on the meter and the geyser is burst, then it turns off the water and there's less damage on the property. So that's an important one for me. So I do encourage everyone, if you're thinking of your becoming a landlord, etc., is really, and even if you do have existing properties and you're wanting to reduce the administration on your property, is to reach out to us on the SAPIN-Prepaid side. You're welcome to go directly to the websites. In the description at the bottom, there's the links to the websites, etc. And you're welcome to drop us a message in the description as well for any questions that you're sort of unsure about. Otherwise, thanks very much for joining us, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks' time.